Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's review for Better Call Saul Season 5, Episode 4, Namaste. This video is part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Better Call Saul, so I have to start with a spoiler warning for Better Call Saul up to Season 5, Episode 4. If you haven't seen up to this point, you will not want to watch this video, otherwise some things will be spoiled for you. So, yeah, this is another great episode of Better Call Saul. I wouldn't say this would be the best of the season or anything like that, or one of the most memorable episodes, but I don't think it's a filler episode. I don't think it's a downturn. I think it's keeping up the very interesting storytelling that this show is so great at. So, let me start with the Saul Goodman, or Jimmy McGill if you prefer. He's kind of switching between them at the moment, and Kim stuff. So this is pretty interesting that it starts with them lying in bed naked, so sort of suggesting that they got it on last night. And as we saw from the previous episode, that was the night where they were throwing bottles. So again, this is Jimmy and Kim's relationship's kind of really off and on, because as I said, the previous episodes depicted a really dying relationship devoid of love, but whenever Jimmy does something exciting or something where Kim feels a release that endears her to him more. But as you can see the next morning, when they had all the broken glass on the ground, Jimmy's like, just leave it, that's what we pay rent for. And Kim didn't, though. As soon as Jimmy left, she went and cleaned it. And this, I think, was a perfect illustration of the difference between Jimmy and Kim, and also talks about how Kim feels regret. Like, she has these moments where she wants to be a bad person, if you want to say, with Jimmy, and wants to release, but then she always regrets it later, and she goes back to regretting it, where Jimmy doesn't. Jimmy, or Saul, he doesn't care. He never regrets anything, which is pretty interesting. So, further with Kim, you find that she is still feeling very sad about the guy who's getting kicked out of his house. She feels like she's on the wrong team. So it does seem like the thing that he said to her yesterday about her being a bad person really got to her. And even though she yelled at him, it seems like he got to her, and she actually thinks he's right. And because, as I said in my previous review of last week's episode, he sort of nailed her on the head, or got her down pat about how she does all this volunteer work to try to ease her guilty conscience. And so she really wanted to help him, but he refused her help. So she tells Jimmy before she goes to work that she, did something bad and she's going to make it right. So we see her, Mercer Verde, trying to convince them to build their call center elsewhere so the dude could keep his house. But that attempt failed, and you could tell that she was very passionate about it. And it got to the point where it was obvious that the Mercer Verde guys weren't going to say yes to this, and that she'd lost. And I wondered, because she had that look on her face like she wanted to say more, and I was like, oh, don't say more, because I know that saying more would just be worse, because it's clear that Mercer Verde had already made up their minds. But I think she realized that, but she's not at all happy with it. But she knows that anything she says to them is not really going to make any difference. So, this is pretty interesting. She goes to good old Jimmy. Now this is interesting because she goes to sit in on one of Saul Goodman's court cases, which this was pretty funny. It's like typical Saul antics, where he, is defending this guy who robbed the cash register. Allegedly, but come on. And he dresses up some other guy who looks similar to him and pretends he's a client. And so when the witness identifies him, he's like, "But this isn't the right guy." And of course, this pisses off the judge. And as we find out, he tells Kim that the two most beautiful words are mistrial. So he did that on purpose to get a mistrial, which is classic Saul Goodman or classic Jimmy McGill, because it reminds me of when he worked at Davis and Maine, where he like purposely got himself fired. he knows how to annoy people and piss people off. So that was cool. That was like typical Saul antics. But Kim goes to Jimmy afterwards, and I think if I remember correctly, in the scene, we don't see what she asks of him, but I think it's pretty clear. Like, I think I got it. I don't think they really need to say. You got it that she wanted his help with the guy who's getting kicked out of his house, because it's obvious, and this is something, because this is a pattern for Kim. She doesn't get her way legally or through the right means. She goes to Jimmy and does it the wrong way, or the sneaky way, or the deceitful way, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, we saw this as the case the previous season, where she was trying to get permits for Mercer Verde to build a bank, and she couldn't do it through the right means, so she got Jimmy, and they went and they conned him. And earlier this season, even though when she had this client who refused to take the deal that would have saved him and was going to absolutely screw himself, even though she was very resistant and told Jimmy no at first, because Jimmy suggested that they sort of con him, and she's like, "No, I'm not going to do that," but she does it anyway. So this is a pattern with her that and this is really interesting. I'm really curious to see, because we know that Jimmy and Kim's relationship is going to fall apart eventually. I mean, we don't know that for sure, but judging by, again, how awful their relationship is, and this is a very unhealthy relationship. As much as I love these characters and I love them together, I think they're making it clear that, because either there is a really soulless, empty relationship where that's really falling apart and they don't like each other, or they get passionate and in love overdoing like deceitful things. And as I pointed out, that's not a problem for Jimmy, but that's clearly a problem for Kim, as her conscience doesn't punishes her for whenever she does that, but she can't help herself. So Jimmy is really a bad influence on her. He's kind of the crux that she goes to feed her darker side or whatever, but she still has a conscience that hates her for doing that, whereas Jimmy, no conscience. He doesn't give a shit, and I think that bothers Kim even more. So we see clearly that Jimmy goes out to that dude who didn't want to leave his house, and convinces to be his lawyer. So this is going to be interesting. Very interesting to see where it goes from here. Now, backtracking to Jimmy, of course, because the whole episode opens with him looking at stuff in a thrift store, and he's like practice throwing it to see what's the best thing to throw. You're like, oh, what's that all about? And then later in the episode, we see him go to lunch with Howard, because he had approached him earlier, and Howard asks him to work at HHM, and Jimmy's response is like, why the hell would I work with you after the shit you did to me? It's like, no, that was more of shock, that was water under the bridge. Now, I think it's clear here that part of the reason why Howard is doing this is because of his guilty conscience, because he feels he played a role in Chuck's suicide, and I think he's feeling guilty for feeding the feud between Chuck and Jimmy, and so this is, in his mind, this is probably the way to make things right. I mean, what he said about Jimmy being a good lawyer, I mean, that's true, that he's a hard worker or whatnot, but Jimmy even pointed out, like, you should talk to the people at Davis and Maine, because it's clear that Jimmy wouldn't be happy and working for H.A. Jim, just like he was at Davison, Maine, where he hated it and then had to be an asshole to get himself fired so he could keep his money. So it's clear that he actually, and as I said, like the start of the show, Jimmy was all about emulating Chuck. He wanted to be Chuck. He wanted to work at H.A. Jim. But the events of the show has sort of really changed and progressed him. Of course, this whole feud with Chuck, where now he like hates Chuck and doesn't want anything to do with anything that Chuck was like. He no longer wants to emulate Chuck. He wants to be sleazy. So, Howard's like, oh, you don't have to answer me now. You can give me the response later. But it's very clear what Jimmy's response is going to be. We kind of know that from Breaking Bad. Although, maybe he does say yes, but then eventually quits or something. But I doubt it. I would sort of go with him just turning Howard down outright. But I guess that's the way to keep this character in the show. It's funny, because I was saying in earlier seasons how Nacho was the main character, but we never saw Nacho, particularly season 2. I think we went most of the season without seeing him. But now Howard is the main character, and we hardly ever see. But, it's where the story goes. But anyway, we find out that those bowling balls he bought, those stuff that he bought from the thrift store to throw, was to chuck at Howard's car, which we recognize, of course, because they made a point of showing the license plate when he had lunch with Jimmy, where it says Namaste, and Jimmy gives it this nasty look, and then we get closure, full circle at the end of the episode, where we see Jimmy throwing those bowling balls at the car, and we see the license plate Namaste. So, same car, and Howard comes out. Now, will Howard find out that it was Jimmy who did it? Or does he know? I don't think so. I'm going to go with no. I don't think he knows that Jimmy did it. Yeah. I mean, I think he's a bit oblivious to that. But I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. We'll have to see where things go to from there. So anyway, we also get stuff with Hank hunting down Gus's men, as we see that from the previous episode that Lalo played this trick to try to get Gus, but of course Nacho told Gus about it, so he's aware of it, but he doesn't want to take the money away or stop them, because then Lalo would know that there's a spy feeding Gus information, and Nacho's too precious for him as an informant, so he lets Hank get the arrest, but he sort of does it on his terms. Now, I'm still not entirely certain what are Gus's terms, why he was so good, but it was clear that he wanted Hank to get the money, and he wanted those 3 people to get arrested. The one person who was running away, he didn't want to get arrested, so he got away. I'm still not entirely sure why, but I don't know. I thought that was pretty damn interesting. I mean, the stuff with the guy cleaning the fryer, I mean, I guess that was there to add atmosphere and show how Gus's sort of darker side. Because last time we saw Gus with the fast food employees, he was like, oh, we're going to get together team, and was giving inspirational speeches, but this time he's being a dick. Oh, that's not, is that clean? Are you satisfied with that? But it's more typical Gus. And like, goddamn, this actor is so good. I think I have to officially say that I can't remember his name or can't pronounce it correctly, but the actor who plays Gus, he has the best frown ever of any actor ever, any character. Like, the Gus frown is hands down the number one frown you've ever seen on television, or movies, or anything. Like the way, when he's on the phone, when he's waiting for the call from the drug people, he had that frown. And when he was talking to the guy who's cleaning the fryer, he just had that frown. I was like, that's the best frown ever. But anyway, so we also get a few scenes with Mike. Now, so he's still in the downturn. So Mike shows up at his daughter-in-law's house, and I was expecting him to apologize and be like, look, I'm really sorry that this won't happen again. But no, he was still being arrogant. He just showed up as if nothing was wrong. It was like, hey, it's my day to look after, my granddaughter. And she's like, nah, well, maybe it's not the best time to do that. And instead of, like, being like, look, I'm sorry I did that. I promise we won't have it again. He's more arrogant about it. He's like, what? What's wrong with me? Why do I have to be? I'll go apologize to her, to the little girl. And she's like, no, it's not her, blah, blah, blah. And he gets pissed off when his daughter-in-law turns him down. So, and she rightfully points out that that there's something going on with him. Like, she can tell, and he's still in denial about it, obviously. So, pretty interesting. Those guys who tried to harass him, that he kicked their ass, he purposely walks by them, and this time he gets his ass kicked. Now, I would argue that he lets them do it, because you could argue that this time they sort of gang up on him and approach him from all sides, and it's like 6 people against 1, so he's clear to lose. But I think if he really wanted to win, he could have won. I don't think this, at first I thought this was about like him getting his kicks out of like kicking people's asses, but no, he wanted to get his ass kicked, and we see him get stabbed. So I think it's possible he actually wanted to die. He's being a bit masochistic now. So he's still on a huge downturn, but we know that eventually he's going to go work for Mike. So something's going to happen to turn this around. I'm still completely puzzled to what it would be. But of course, after, we see him get attacked and stabbed, instead of waking up in the hospital, which is what I expected to see, he wakes up in some house on some compound. Still don't know. I don't know. Some people might know, but I don't know where he is, who brought him there. I mean, my guess, the best guess would be it would be Gus or someone to do with Gus, but I mean, it's got to be, right? But I don't know. You never know with this show. I mean, they showed in the preview for the next episode, they showed someone with Mike, but they didn't show who it was. So they don't want you to know yet. But anyway, that is it. Oh, wait, that's not it, because I have to give my rating for Namaste out of 10. I'm going to give this teetering between a 7 and 8. I think I'll give it a 7. It's not quite 8-ness, but it's a really good episode, almost an 8. It's going to be a 7 out of 10. Very good. This is a good quality episode of Better Call Saul that contributed to the whole, and had the great character stories that continued with. Now again, it's really slow paced, but hey, that's par for the course for a Better Call Saul episode, particularly a mid-season Better Call Saul episode. So it's kind of expected, and nothing wrong with it. I mean, I'm not going to say it's one of the best episodes ever, but all these good episodes, all these slow episodes contribute to a really great show. So anyway, that is it for my review of Namaste. I shall be back next week to cover the next episode of Better Call Saul, so be sure to check that out. Also check out my channel as I cover many other shows like Picard, The Expanse, Star Trek, and more. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching.